Welcome to Deep Thought. Culture is power. Culture is power. And I alluded to this in my previous podcast. Culture is a form of power. How is that, you might say? Because culture informs us of, mainly how we behave, but also the foods that we eat. It informs us about the type of clothes that we'll wear. And then now all of that has an effect on economics. And economics, of course, is a form of power because people are influenced by money. Now, I know on my main channel, I'll say, you don't need money to get a woman, but it's still going to, or mate, but it's still going to influence it. And with women making money nowadays, it still influences a person. And also the money issue, it influences how someone will treat you. If you walk in and if you walk into any restaurant, you perceive as having money, you'll get better service. And then regardless of how you perceive, you give a good tip. The next time you walk in, you get even greater service. But that's a power to influence someone's behavior. Now, the base of that economic power, and sometimes indeed even military power, force, or social power, being able to persuade someone because of your social standing, the base is in culture. Because a culture, if you think about it, because you have to think about it holistically. Like certain cultures might say, and I have a video coming tomorrow talking about like the whole eating piece, but just a brief preview or just a brief thought on it. Culture is going to tell you what type of food to eat. Now in the video tomorrow, I'm going to mention something about eating at a Creole restaurant. Now that comes from a certain culture, my father's culture. There's certain foods that they will eat, certain foods they wouldn't eat, and any place. And then around the food is actually a social thing because people come together to eat. But that's a power thing right there too, because a person, like there was a movie, roughly, when did it come out? Soul Food. Some people might remember it. And, it was about a black family, extended black family. And, the main focal point was the matriarch of the family. And they would always have Sunday dinner and together. And it was interesting. There was a scene where she was kind of holding forth, the matriarch was kind of holding forth and giving direction to her children. But that's a social thing. That's a social organization. And that's a culture. Think about it. That's a culture. Because what this culture is, culture actually comes from the word cultivate. You cultivate a certain amount of behavior, but it's a form of power. For example, using that soul food example again, the matriarch was exercising power over these young women who, quite frankly, you had a professional. One was just a housewife. You had another one who owned a business. Another one who was a professional, was an attorney. Yet this woman, we're not sure what she might have done in life, was able to exercise power through that culture just within the family. Then when you extend that to a greater community, that's a form of power because it's a form of persuasion. Then the culture says this or that. And then on an economic basis, because I talked about thought and economics in my previous podcast, economic basis, people really make money off of a culture. People generate their businesses off of a culture because when you have a culture and a community who serves that culture, you need businesses to serve that community. The other day, I went into my sons wanted something from a Subway, a local Subway. And it was a local Subway I go to. And the franchise, from as much as I can tell, is owned by Indians. And it was interesting, when we came in, there was a whole lot of Indians in there. Now, through that culture, now, regardless of who else goes in there to eat, that culture is empowering whoever owns that particular franchise. And I saw the same thing with when I was living in the D.C. area, and I would go to Ethiopian restaurants. Oh, I love Ethiopian. I got something to do this week. Oh, man, I love Ethiopian. I love it. I might get some this week. But the thing with the Ethiopian, they were making money. One, they were making money off the culture. That was giving them a form of power, a form of purchasing power, economic power, but also social power within, because they were gathering, these restaurants always were mainly supported by Ethiopians. And it is regardless of everything. Culture is really the base of power. It really is, because it's a social thing. It's a social thing. Even economics really is social. It's I can check out my podcast from the other day, but that's a key to it. Now, one of the things, I better not go there, but. And actually, it was a political thing I was going to go into. But if you look at everything and how it's done, everything's done according to a culture. Our holidays, that's a cultural thing. And what we spend on the holidays, Valentine's Day. I mentioned Valentine's Day in the previous podcast. That's a cultural thing to say, hey, we need this day to celebrate love. That's a culture. Now, whoever is in a position to provide what's needed, whether it's greeting cards, chocolate, whoever makes those stuffed bears, places that sell roses, they empowered, but that's based on the culture. You see what I'm saying there? Any economics is really mainly based on behavior anyway. But it's also a tool of empowerment. And honestly, it could be a tool of disempowerment. If your culture doesn't empower you. Like you have certain communities in America, and this could be especially a lot of poor communities, maybe the culture there, regardless of racial background, is preventing them from moving up forward. Because you do have cultures within... you have subcultures within different classes. And one of the reasons why, you could have a culture based on like just immediate gratification and consumption. Now, a culture such as that would be hard to really be empowered, because it's spending its money on objects that are controlled by aliens or people outside the community. But it could empower in other ways too. It can also empower it. It could have maybe a different thought pattern on what to spend money on. People could say, well, you know what, we can't afford all this stuff, so we're gonna pool our resources. Or we're gonna get power by saying, okay, it's not gonna be based on who got the most purchasing power, but who got the most social power. And it's an interesting dynamic, and it's really, honestly, culture is the key. Culture is the key. If you want to change something, change any dynamic, you change the culture first. And then everything else will follow. Think about that. Think about that. And that's in anything that you want to do. Anything. So anyway, there's always something to think about. Peace and blessings.